Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are very fortunate to be joined by Vanushi who is Labour's Shadow Attorney General and spokesperson for Foreign Affairs, the GCSB and the NZSIS. Hey Vanushi, welcome to G News.
Thank you for having me on.
You're most welcome. Many New Zealanders yearn for a more principled government right now.
Mm.
And you, I've heard, are developing Labour's foreign affairs policies, and you have said that your approach is for New Zealand to be practical, principled, and consistent. Could you talk us through the importance of each of these three aspects of our foreign affairs policy?
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps I'll start with the final two. So, being principled and consistent, in my view, sit together. And what that means is really standing up in defence of our rules based orders, so international law and the application of international humanitarian law as well, but doing it in a consistent way. When we see international states breaching that rules based order, we should be calling that out consistently, regardless of who is breaching that law. And that's really the place where I see quite a distinction in terms of our approach within Labour and what we're seeing in the current government. The current government is calling out some breaches of international law, but not others. And so that is problematic for us, both in terms of our values base. It also means we're less predictable in the international space. And I've said that makes us squeezable. It means that countries believe they can put pressure on us, and I think that's a significant problem. I think we also need to be pragmatic. Like many across the world and here in New Zealand, I listened to Mark Carney's speech at Davos, and he used the word pragmatic as well. And he talked about a shifting or changing order in the world. Not that it's completely gone, but we certainly need to work with the world as it is. And I think that means for us navigating our trade relationships alongside our defence relationships with respect, alongside calling out parties when we think there has been a breach.
With regard to calling out parties when there's been a breach, last year this government took a position that it was not the time now for a two-state solution for Palestine, so we wouldn't call it a state. But since then, we've seen the situation in the West Bank deteriorate badly with a rapid increase in new Israeli settlements, the passage of an ethnic death penalty bill by Israel that singles out Palestinians, and constant breaches of the ceasefire by Israel in Gaza. What do you think of our position on this matter, and should our government be calling that issue out?
I think our government should be calling that issue out, and I don't think we've done nearly as much as we should in response to the conflict in Gaza. So I do believe that the government should have recognised Palestine when that opportunity was present, when a number of other states were doing that. And it's certainly something that we would do as Labour. We've also said that we would support sanctions being applied, so full sanctions as opposed to the travel restrictions that currently have been applied within Gaza. We've said that we would look to consider things like humanitarian visas, which when Labour were in government we did in relation to Myanmar and in relation to Afghanistan as well. So New Zealand has a reputation for acting in this space, and I think that it is really appalling that our government have chosen not to do that.
Yeah. Well, on the US-Iran war, you recently wrote that Winston Peters should tell the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in his meeting that the way that the Israeli-US attack on Iran began violated Clause 2, Part 4 of the UN Charter. Are you able to confirm whether this was or was not discussed by Winston Peters in his recent meeting with Marco Rubio? And why is it important that we uphold international law consistently, even to our biggest trading partners?
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned here because from what I've read, I don't believe that that issue has been raised. I don't believe the issue has been raised about Trump's use of language when he talked about the end of a civilization, which is incredibly inappropriate. And I don't think it's been raised concern about the US targeting energy facilities and civilian facilities either. In my view, the foreign minister should have raised those issues with the US during his visit. Indeed, many of those issues in terms of what happened with the US and Israel's initial incursion should have been raised at the time, and they haven't been. It is important that we do that, and we do that consistently. So the US and other countries should be expecting us to walk into those rooms, raising constructive issues of partnership, as we do, but also raising those human rights issues. Now, let's remember the China are observing that we are doing this in relation to China. We did it very recently in terms of the defence agreement, and so they're noticing that this does appear to be one-sided in terms of this government's approach.
Yeah, would you say that we're heading towards alignment with the United States here?
I worry that some of the language indicates that's where we're heading. And the specific language that I've quoted before is when Luxon talked about New Zealand being a force multiplier for the US and the Pacific, which I don't think is in New Zealand's interests. And I think we have to be extremely cautious about ever using language like that when clearly we have two key trade partners, of which China is a significantly larger partner in the region. I think we need to be cautious about positioning China as an aggressor against New Zealand. So I think that was very unhelpful, and I worry about where this government will take us in terms of that framing.
Yeah, so do I. I mean, I've heard the Prime Minister condemn the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and Iran bombing its neighbours who have military bases for the United States. But when it comes to bombing of civilian infrastructure inside Iran, or the elementary school, the hospitals there, and that threat you mentioned about the entire civilization will die tonight, I'm not hearing the Prime Minister condemn this at all, or Winston Peters, the Foreign Minister. Is that what you're seeing as well?
That's what I'm seeing as well, and I think it's not going unnoticed in terms of that international space. So the concern is not only that it's a failure to be consistent and stand up for those principles, but again, as you've suggested, and I've suggested in other commentary, that concern around alignment and that clear absence of balance in terms of the international statements we're making. I mean, what we constantly push for is the fact that New Zealand needs to protect our independent foreign policy. And the way in which you can see an independent foreign policy in action is when you see those balanced statements across the board. That's simply not happening here.
Yeah. You made the comment earlier about the rules-based order and the importance of that, and there's a threat to it. What do you think the role for middle powers are in shaping our future? You talked about what Mark Carney had to say, and why it's important for nations like New Zealand to speak up, especially at times like these.
Yeah, I think it is important for us to speak up. Middle powers and smaller powers as well. And sometimes, in the context of the current chaos that we're seeing in parts of the world, it's easy to forget that there are many nation states that do respect the UN Charter, that have held on to that rule about non-aggression very closely. And so there is still defence there. There are still like-minded partners who understand the importance of protecting the rules-based order. I am still a believer in the UN as a key vessel for many of those conversations. And I also think that there are other opportunities to speak with the likes of Canada, with colleagues across the Pacific, colleagues in ASEAN, about ensuring that we are embedding the rules-based order and protecting it across the world, but also here in our region.
You recently successfully called for an urgent debate about the US-Israel-Iran conflict in Parliament. And at one point in that debate, I noticed you began talking about how New Zealand could have been much better prepared for this oil shock that we're in. Could you elaborate now, without being interrupted, about the ways in which this government could have been more prepared for the situation that we all find ourselves in today?
Absolutely. So I mean, when we were in government, one of the things that we strongly encouraged through the EV subsidy was for New Zealanders to shift the way in which they use transport. Now, this government will argue, well, that's just targeting support for a particular group of New Zealanders. I think the group is broader than they would like to admit, is the first point there. But also, when we're talking about a total pool of resources or oil coming to New Zealand, if you remove part of the demand on that, it does. The simple maths of it does extend the period that you can get through. So that's one. We also, in terms of rules around importing dirty cars or dirty vehicles to New Zealand, we set up that system. We've seen a significant erosion of it by this government. I understand that it's currently under review completely as well. So even the fraction that remains may go. But we had the vision then to start New Zealanders thinking about how they could use transport differently. And that's something that this government essentially turned around. In terms of diesel storage, we had in 2022 a cabinet decision regarding the storage of 70 million litres of diesel in New Zealand that we made in 2024. There was a cabinet decision of this government that essentially took that backwards, which means that instead of having a facility that's up and running now, that may happen only in 2028. So some of those things directly related to energy would have been done had a Labour government continued.
I understand that Shane Jones has been saying that he didn't have the funds to put that diesel storage facility into practice, but that's not exactly true, is it?
Well, the decision had been made by Cabinet, and so I think the key thing for me is looking at what our leadership, as a Labour leadership, had put on track to progress, and that was the 2022 decision. The Cabinet decision of 2024 went, no, slow that down, backtrack, we're not going to prioritise that. So had we been in government, then that would have been something that we progressed. There was an active decision not to do that, and I think Shane Jones has to own that.
Yeah, so do I. You've mentioned relationships and how important relationships are, in particular with respect to our own region in the Pacific. What do you think we need to focus on in our own region at the moment, and how important is regular contact with our Pacific neighbours?
Well, this is our neighbourhood, and I think the Pacific and Pacific relationships are always going to be a key for us. Focus is hard for me to define because I think it's a number of things. Obviously, there are discussions about defence in terms of the Pacific and security, and how we secure that for one another. There are questions of the movement of people and ensuring that we have a Pacific economy that is growing. So that's about looking at reducing regulatory differences across the region to make it as easy as possible for people to transact, do business, bank across the region. We have common interests in terms of what we aspire for in the Pacific. So those relate to climate change, which of course affect us here in the Pacific, and certainly some of our island neighbours to extreme proportions, and looking at what that means as a region, how we manage risk, but also how we prepare for some of the consequences of climate change. We have a common vision in protecting our oceans, and I think New Zealand should not so much lead, it's a question of standing alongside our Pacific leaders and agreeing what are the common aspirations that we hold, and how should we be acting on them together. The current crisis we're in, I think, has also highlighted the fact that for many Pacific countries, we are all at the end of a very long supply chain. And when situations like this happen, we need to work out how we collectively lobby when there might need to be, a reduction in consumption, how we do that in a way that's equitable and fair, in a way that we're standing up for the interests of our Pacific neighbours.
We've seen quite a reduction in aid from the United States into the Pacific, and I'm not sure whether we've actually really pushed hard enough for assistance from the United States, but we certainly not hearing much about that. We heard something from the last meeting with um, Winston Peters up there with Marco Rubio, but where are we at with foreign aid at the moment to our neighbours?
I'm glad you mentioned aid because that is absolutely another focus for us, especially given the dismantling of US AID. My understanding is that the US are still going to put some funding into the Pacific, but not necessarily through the partnerships that USAID had. And that is a concern for me. I worry about the resurgence of diseases like HIV in countries across the Pacific where we thought we'd eradicated that in parts of the Pacific. So my view is it's not just about the dollar, it's about where we put that funding and identifying the gaps which will be in health. And in other areas traditionally funded by that aid budget. The US dollar is likely to go more into trade partnerships, potentially into the security space as well. But I do know that the Australians are also thinking in this space as well. And we're fairly good at sharing data and information with the Australians in terms of working out where that spend can best be achieved. Undoubtedly, there's still going to be a gap there, and we do need to work out what we do to address that, particularly in health.
Now, just the last question on the Pacific, but when it comes to security, you mentioned security. We've budgeted to do all sorts of upgrades in defence and to be interoperable in the region with Australia in particular. Is there a kind of a cowering effect? It sounds like we're keeping our head down and not talking up about these other issues on foreign affairs, possibly because we're trying not to be punished, or we're trying not to have some sort of blowback on us, whether it was with tariffs. But we've also got these defence contracts, don't we, in place, or coming. Could you comment on any of that space?
So obviously I'm not the defence spokesperson, but defence is inherently interwoven into the foreign affairs space. With our relationship with Australia, we have, I would say, an important historic defensive relationship with Australia. It is the key relationship that we've had for decades now. As a Labor team, we didn't oppose the increase to the defence budget last year, and that was based on a number of factors, including money going into the service itself, so HR and the staffing and the personnel who work in that space, end of life in terms of some Defence Force assets, a bit of a focus on technology as well, and that applies in the interoperability space. And when you look at the response to so something like Cyclone Gabriel, we do lean on the Australian Defence Force as well in terms of some of our response. So it is there and it is valid in my view. However, we also need to continue to ensure that there is independence in our foreign policy decisions. And Australia, we must acknowledge, has other relationships that will also guide its defence behaviour. And so those are absolutely complex discussions to be had. I think, again, we need to be cautious about how we're approaching our defence relationships and positioning more broadly, and be very cautious that when we look to be aligning on one side, others will notice that as well. For me, the best way for us to manage those relationships again is being clear about the fact that we have a relationship with Australia. That's undeniable. But outside of that, looking at how we ensure that we're calling out both sides when issues come up in the defence space.
Great. In your role as Shadow Attorney General, I want to ask you for your view on a statement made by the Human Rights Commission recently about this government's pay equity amendment. In a statement, the Commission said its position is that the amendments undermine human rights in Aotearoa, New Zealand, including the specific human rights dimensions of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. What's your view on this?
Yeah, I've seen that comment myself as well. It's unsurprising to me. As a Labor Party, we've called out those amendments as well. I actually came back into the it came back into Parliament last year in May, just the week after those amendments went through the House. And I was extremely alarmed, not only because of the effect of the amendments, which I think is horrific, in that in many ways it removes the opportunity for pay equity to occur by severely limiting all of the criteria for getting to pay equity. The process that the government used to do it is also, in my view, an extremely inappropriate one. They put the legislation through under all stages urgency without hearing from a number of people, thousands of people, thousands and thousands of women who would be impacted. The pay gap in New Zealand has a disproportionate impact on certain parts of our community. Māori women are absolutely part of that narrative in terms of who it impacts, as are Pacific women, as are Asian women as well. So I think the Human Rights Commissioner is doing its job in terms of calling that out. We've also had the People's Select Committee call out the same issues as well, and I think that New Zealanders should be paying attention to that.
Yeah. Now, you've got a lot of experience behind you as a human rights lawyer and also as a person that's, done some delegations overseas in foreign affairs and more. You're standing for Labour in the 2026 election in Waitakere. Could you tell us a bit about your experience? What are the big issues in Waitakere and why people should vote for you?
Thank you. And it's such a pleasure to stand in Waitakere. So this is my home. I live in the Waitakere Ranges and I'm very biased, but it's seriously the most beautiful place in the country. I know the area very well. It's where my kids have gone to school. My husband works from there. I've worked from there for a number of years as well. I've been an electorate MP before in northwest Auckland, so I know what it's like to set up an office on the ground. I've run a community law centre before as well. And I think what people want is someone to be present and to listen to them, who can help them navigate very complex issues, who can advocate on their behalf, and who knows how to move on both the big issues in the House as well as the smaller local issues that impact them and their community. Why should people vote for me? I think I've already been out door knocking, but also surveying people on the issues that matter to them, and starting to take some action on advocacy on those issues. So hopefully they'll see that in me they'll get someone who's both a local advocate who takes their issues very seriously and will come back to them and let them know what I've done, but also someone in the House who can work across a number of different big issues, which I think some of my portfolios allow me to do, and can help move on some of those things that New Zealanders care about. And I do believe New Zealanders care about human rights, about democracy, about integrity, and about a government that they can trust.
Wonderful. Thank you. Finally, do you have any messages that you'd like to tell our listeners as we go through a fairly difficult time now financially and economically, and as we head into the 2026 election?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is we hear you. I'm door knocking almost every weekend, and everyone's saying the cost of living pressures are huge. That will be our focus as we head into the election campaign for Labour, making New Zealand affordable, a livable place. The one thing I would ask is register to vote and get out and vote. Make sure your friends and your whānau do as well. The rules are changing this year. The government have changed the rules so that you have to register to vote 13 days before the election. This is the first time in 30 years that you can't either register on the day of or the day before, and it's going to come as a surprise to a lot of people. So register early, get out and vote.
Vanushi Walters, thank you so much for joining us today on G News. As far as we're concerned, you're a rising star, and we wish you all the best and hope you're successful in the election.
A pleasure to join you.
Welcome to G News, the good news.